Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Bloxham, Jim's youngest son. Thanks for coming to his memorial today, for supporting the family, and for honoring and remembering my dad. I have 3 stories for you today from my childhood that illustrate what it was like to be Jim Bloxham's son. A series of dadisms that were heard around the house and especially in the car growing up. And finally, one story from my daughter Rachel's childhood, from when she was just too young to even barely be able to remember it. But so I'll be telling that story as well. The first one is about flag football. So Dad was my flag football coach of my team when I was in elementary school. I was just kind of an average athlete growing up. Not the last kid picked for the team on the elementary school playground, but certainly not a star either. He decided to let me play running back for the team. And the other kids kind of razzed me, saying that, well, the only reason you're allowed to play that key position is that he's the coach and you're his kid. Truth is, they were probably right. I wasn't really a very good running back. Looking back on it, though, nepotism issues aside, it was pretty cool knowing that my dad went out on a limb because he wanted to give me a shot. And he didn't care if anyone said that it was favoritism. So yeah, technically he did the wrong thing, but I'm meaning favoritism. But at the end of the day, it was pretty great being Jim Bloxham's son. And I might have been a lousy running back, but at least I knew that I was loved. So yeah, that's the first story. The second story is about when I was in Y Indian Guides as a kid. And so here we are, Dad and little Bradley in our costumes / uniforms for the Y Indian Guides. So this was also during my elementary school years, as you can see from the picture, and hopefully you'll be able to see that picture along with another one illustration I'm going to show a little bit later in this story. Yeah, during my elementary school years, this was a program in the YMCA, a father-son program. My dad and I were in it. It was called Y Indian Guides. Some of you may remember. That's going back a ways. And each father-son pair had to come up with their own themed names. And we wore emblems with our names on them around our neck, along with and you can actually see those in the picture that we're wearing them. You wore them around your neck with a little leather sort of string. And there was an accompanying logo that illustrated your names along with your names. And most all of the other pairs had names like Big Eagle and Little Eagle. And they'd be like, "How we are Big Bear and Little Bear. Oh, this is Big Wolf and Little Wolf. Big Eagle, Little Eagle," etc. And at the time I remember thinking, well, that gets old pretty fast. Not very clever. But we were Rising Sun and Setting Sun. And yes, my dad came up with those names, and I thought it was pretty clever. And I just thought those were the coolest names ever. And there's a photo that hopefully you will see along with a picture of us of the emblems in the at the end when we do the slideshow. I was never very happy with the way my thing came out. My attempt to capture the idea of the ragged sunrise over ragged mountain peak concept. I just never liked the way it turned out. But it's kind of hard to go back and erase something that is burned into leather. So, yeah, kind of hard to redo that. But I always loved my dad's attention to detail on his emblem. Even though he wasn't a particularly artsy-fartsy kind of a guy, the clean line of the desert floor, the perfect cactus, the bright red sunset, and the white cloud, which is now faded with time. So yeah, some of the color of the old leather has faded over the years. But there's probably a reason that I have kept these emblems all these years later. Coolest Y Indian guide names ever. And the third story is about baseball. One time when I was in Little League Baseball, I did hit a home run. Now, in Little League, there's no fence to hit the ball over so that you know, oh, it went over the fence, it's a home run. It was all in the park home run, so to speak. But if you hit it hard enough, it just keeps going into the next field on the other side of the park. Well, for whatever reason, and see above under flag football regarding my less than stellar athletic abilities, I just connected with the ball on that day. It went over the outfielder's head, and it rolled past where the outfield fence would have been, and on into the outfield of the other game being played in the field across the park. He dutifully ran after it, the outfielder on the opposing team, but that poor kid never stood a chance. As I rounded third base, there was my dad, waiting for me at home plate, screaming, "Keep going, keep going." Anyways, when I finally landed on home plate, my dad picked me up, gave me a raging bear hug, and threw me in the air and just whooping and hollering all the while. And if you know my dad, he's a pretty reserved guy, so I had never seen him act like that. But nonetheless, it was a classic, that's my boy moment, to use a cliche, but I think it makes a point. And again, just another example of why it's a great thing to be Jim's Bloxam son. I miss you, Dad. Next on the agenda, dadisms. So most of these are while driving, probably on the 405 freeway, in traffic, in Southern California. First one, while driving. He used to say, "Well, that guy's taking his half out of the middle." Another one, also while driving. "That guy's an accident going somewhere to happen." And this one is one of my favorites. So this is also while driving, and you're driving past a big accident that we just waited like an hour in traffic, backed up to get past it. So as we're driving past it, Dad would notice, well, there's no lanes blocked. Everything's been pulled over to the side. And he would say, "Oh, everybody's just slowing down to see if they can see any blood," aka Gawker block, as they call it on KNX 1070. Another one, again, while driving. This was, you're stuck behind somebody in traffic, and they're driving slow, and they're holding up all the traffic. And he would finally get past the guy, and he would say, "Oh, it's just an old man in a hat," because he would always say that old men in hats were the worst drivers. The last one is just something he used to say about a city in the Los Angeles basin. "El Segundo, where the sewer meets the sea." Anyways, my final story comes from Rachel's childhood. She is the youngest child on my side, and Jim's grandchild. So, this is about Junie B. Jones. Rachel was probably 4 or 5 years old. And at the time, the Junie B. Jones books for kids were very popular. If you've never read them to your kids or your grandkids, I highly recommend this series. It's hilarious. One day, probably a Sunday night, we were over at Mom and Dad's, probably having dinner, and we asked Dad if he wanted to read a story to Rachel. He was glad to. He was that kind of guy. And we randomly grabbed a Junie B. Jones book off the shelf and suggested, try this one. She loves Junie B. Jones. If you're not familiar with the series, you need to understand that these books are autobiographical. Junie B. Jones is a little girl, and it's sort of about her life and, her view of the world. So the books are written from her own child's point of view and in her own voice, in her own style of speaking, and in a little girl's language. But poor Dad had never read one of these books before, so he had no idea what he was in for. And none of us had warned him either. So anyway, Dad is reading the book to Rachel. She's cuddled up against Grandpa, and they're having a wonderful time together. Until he gets to the part where Junie says, I did a burp. And Dad starts giggling. And then he starts laughing out loud. He tries to gather his composure and continue reading like a good grandpa, but he just can't. Pretty soon he's just laughing uncontrollably. You know the kind of belly laugh I'm talking about, where you're in tears. You're laughing so hard that your stomach muscles are hurting. And you can't seem to catch a breath, but you just can't stop laughing. It was hilarious to watch. Well, it took about 5 minutes until he was finally able to regain his composure and go back and finish reading the book to Rachel. And we just said, see, I told you they were really good books. Anyways, what a wonderful memory of my dad sharing a moment of just pure, unadulterated joy with his granddaughters. And thank you again for coming.